Life is what happens to you while you're busy making other plans. John Lennon. The Daily Grind, Chapter 151. Reality was still dark as they drove out into it, despite having spent well over 12 hours in the dungeon. Once again they parked by the side of the road, this time after James narrowly avoided hitting an innocent skunk. The three of them stretching out after the long trip, James and Anesh stripping off armor plates they'd been wearing for almost a full day of car travel. "I know I said I liked road trips at the start of this," James informed his boyfriend. "I have decided, in retrospect, that I lied. My legs are sore. I'm not supposed to be sore anymore." "Okay, so what exactly does your point in endurance do?" Anesh glowered at his partner. "Because I feel like even you don't actually know." James sheepishly grinned as he sat on the edge of the driver's seat and shook sand and pebbles out of his boot. "Guilty," he admitted. "Though I'm pretty sure whatever it's doing, it's having some kind of amplificative effect with some of the purple upgrades I have. Like, okay, I clot faster, right? But ever since getting that point in endurance, I clot almost instantly. I don't think I can actually bleed out anymore. It's kind of rad." James slid his boot back on, oblivious to the narrow-eyed frown Anesh was giving him. "Amplificative is not... Were you trying to say multiplicative or amplifying?" "Yes, and I got confused midway through." Anesh snorted slightly. "I love it when you're self-aware," he said. "Hey," he greeted Elle as she got out of her own car and strutted over. "So, what now?" "Now we go home and sleep," she declared, stifling a yawn that quickly turned contagious. "I'm tired, you're tired, the cars are tired, and I feel odd, so I want to nap it off." "Cars don't get..." Elle ignored James. "So hey, before we go, touch this with me." She held out the strange gear from earlier, still no longer humming. I guess I figure we should share it now, just so I'm not tempted later, you know?" "Sure." James shrugged and reached out to settle his fingers against the surface of the gear. Next to him, Anesh did the same. It was thick metal, not marred by rust or burns, but it still felt old. "What are we supposed to do?" James asked. Elle made a half shrug as she held the gear by its center with her other arm extended. "Just think about, moving?" She kicked the ground like an angry child. "Fuck, man, I don't know. You're the one who's good with words. It's magic. Eat it with your mind or some shit." "Eloquent as ever," James snarked. But he smothered the grin when he saw Elle was really kind of self-conscious about this. "Okay, moving." He focused on moving, on the feeling of going forward. He let his brain adapt to the vibration of the gear. It was the hum of the road, he realized, so James fell into that vibe. He and Anesh didn't need to be plugged into each other's brains for their minds to go to the same place on this. They'd just had a long amount of time together to get used to this feeling. A second later, the gear was gone. Their hands were stretched out, touching nothing but a ripple of motion, quickly fading away. This time there were no words, not in the same way as the office or the sewer. Instead there was a feeling in James's chest, a space where motion could go if it needed to, where momentum was stockpiled for future need. It wasn't exactly a mana pool, as James understood it, but he could feel what it did, if not what it was for. He could feel how much it could hold. 3. It could hold 3. 3 what? Unclear. 3 something. 3 units of velocity, he supposed. And he could already feel it ticking up. If James focused, really focused, slipped down into the kind of dream meditation he'd begun learning back at the start of all this, he could see it ticking up as he moved. Fractions of fractions of fractions. If it ever made it to a whole number, it would be so much easier to feel the increment, James instinctively knew, but for now it was just kind of sitting there. 0 out of 3, waiting to be filled up and used for some magic he hadn't found yet. He opened his eyes. "Neat," he proclaimed. "What's it do?" "It's an engine," Elle shrugged. "Or a part or something, obviously. Can't explain much, though you know what all my spells are. That said, completely unrelated, hang on to the map scraps. I've got a shoebox full of them under my bed. We can compare later." "Why?" Anesh asked, and then paused. "You know what? Never mind. Let's preserve the surprise, and also your sanity." He noted the last part as Elle practically growled at the thing limiting her answers. She nodded at him. Thanks. The words sounded sarcastic, but there was still a look of real gratitude in her eyes. So yeah, meet up tomorrow. I'm gonna go sleep. Y'all take care. She waved them off as she stalked back to her own car, but before she shut the door, James had one last question for her. Hey, Elle, how much velocity do you have? He called over. 29, Elle yelled back, and then slamming her door shut, she kicked the car out of idle and executed a treacherous-looking U-turn to accelerate down the freeway back toward her hometown. I have a problem with that, Anesh said. Yeah? Yeah, 29. Run the numbers for me, I'm tired, James told his boyfriend. Well, unless we assume there are other gears with different numbers to them, it was a split of this artifact's magic we just did, so that's 9 points a gear, right? Anesh posited. James nodded along. Okay, so how long did Elle know about this place? A year? The door isn't time-locked. She's gotten 4 of these cogs. Counting this one, she has 3 spells, but she seemed to know how the parking structures worked pretty closely. Oh, fuck, James grimaced. Tell me something about the road, Anesh prompted. The convenience stores have a one-way exit. Not a good test. Let me call... James stared at his phone for a second, realizing what time it was. Actually, let's test this tomorrow. But you can feel it, Anesh prompted. There's no infomorph here. There's no urge to keep it secret. It's just on Elle, which means she picked it up on a delve. Anesh shook his head, staring down the dark road that Elle had left by. She's too comfortable here. She's been doing this for longer than she knows, James surmised. Or, no, that's not right. She knows how long she's been doing this. She just isn't seeing it. Anesh, she knew she could split the velocity gear with us. 3s, Anesh stated. The mana amount? Anesh rolled his eyes. No, 3s. It's a thing dungeons like. Groups of 3. You, me, and Alana. The kids back at school. Even now we have rotations of 3 people hanging out in the attic. We delve the sewer with 3-person teams. Why? We broke the habit in the office, but that's not normal. We're doing something different, James jumped in. And now here's Elle. Elle who was already paranoid when Alana and I came through here the first time. Elle who knows the dungeon so well but can't talk about it. Elle... Who's the last one left? Anesh finished. Elle who survived her friends. And forgot, James said. Let's kill this one, Anesh suggested. I'm not going to lie, I had that thought. James cleared his throat. You know we don't actually have a nuke, right? Nate did talk me out of that, and that place is large. We could tear up the road here, get rid of the entrance, Anesh suggested. James shook his head, staring at the dark trees around them as he sagged down to lean his elbows on his knees. We don't know what that'll do, and this is going to sound bad. I don't think that would be fair. He sighed. We haven't tried to kill the office. We haven't even tried to kill the sewer, really. They've killed a lot more people that we're directly aware of. Just given how hard this place is to find, how out of the way it is, I doubt it gets a lot of visitors at all. I wouldn't be surprised if I had a higher body count than it does. I don't like this, Anesh muttered after circling around the car and dropping into the passenger seat. He sat and stared out the window at the line where the dungeon started, blinking rapidly as another car flew past, high beams blinding in the early morning darkness. We're supposed to be the ones that keep people safe from things like this. Are we? James asked, half-focusing as he punched in their motel on his phone's map, and waited while the thin service out here took its sweet time to give him a route. I thought we were... What are we? He mused to himself, pulling back onto the freeway in the tailwind of a logging truck. Presumably we're the goodies, Anesh offered. There's lots of ways to be good, James countered. Sometimes I worry we're not doing enough. Other times I think we're doing too much too fast, he said as they drove. I thought a lot about individual goals since this started, but never what we are, if that makes sense. Like, remember the first couple months? Anesh shot a toothy smile out the window. Ha! We couldn't even decide if we were going into the dungeon every week. He thought for a second about it. And yeah, I guess I see what you mean. We were just trying to get on top of rent or out from under student debt, having some fun without any responsibility. Even after Alana got in on it with us, we already knew we were going to do something eventually, but it was far off, and I was having fun. He trailed off, sounding guilty. I was having fun too, James said. Still am. Don't think there's anything wrong with that. And now we're what? We do good things, but how do we define ourselves? Not just the Order, but us. Am I a bad person because I don't want to kill the dungeons? He asked with a pleading note in his voice. Anesh didn't answer right away, so James continued. I like to think I'm helping build better systems, but I don't have a fucking clue what I'm doing. So I just sort of recklessly help people whenever I can, and then those people do the useful things. That's not fair. Anesh stopped and furrowed his brow. He turned and looked over at James by leaning his left arm on the center console and cupping his fingers around his chin. Wait, no. That is fair. That's very weird. James looks like he wanted to say something, so Anesh waited, but his partner just kept opening and closing his mouth like he couldn't find the words. Face scrunched up, eyes narrowed, staring ahead at the road as they took the exit toward where they were staying. They drove in silence for a few minutes, the car dutifully humming away as they climbed up and around the last hill before the small town's outskirts really started. It was maybe 2:30 in the morning when James stopped the car on the shoulder of that hillside road. Time dilation in the dungeon had flagrantly messed with their sense of time. 12 hours and 10 minutes or so was a much larger gap than the office usually gave. He still hadn't said anything, and Anesh was starting to get worried when he pulled the car over and parked by a dented metal guardrail. With tired movements, James popped his door open and stepped out into the night. Anesh worriedly followed him over to the guardrail, where James was leaning on one of the wooden posts, staring out from their vantage point. Hey. Anesh reached out a hand to James's arm, ignoring the grime and sweat from a half-day of adventures in body armor to give what comfort he could. James didn't flinch away from the gesture, instead leaning into Anesh a little bit. The two of them sat there for a good 5 minutes or so, Anesh watching James with concern, James just staring down at the twinkling lights of a Tennessee small town. A handful of suburban neighborhoods, visible by lines of pale orange streetlights strung through the trees, bright white patches of strip mall parking lots, dark splotches of parks and wilderness that hadn't been built into the town, determined to stay small. The reds and greens of traffic intersections, all of it on a wobbly street grid where the outlines were occasionally visible through the motions of a few scattered cars, headlights and turn signals lighting the channels of a city. Can I tell you something I'm afraid of? James whispered to Anesh, standing there in the dark over the dome of the city's glow being slowly eaten by bugs. Anesh hesitated, but only for a second. If you're comfortable with that, he said. James snorted. Of course he wasn't. That was the problem. But still. I think I might actually believe in fate as a concept, he said. Or something like it. There's currents around the dungeons. Things we've seen, things we know, things we can't ignore. The three-person team thing is part of it. But there's more to it. The organization. Did you know what we found in the old status quo files? The administrator was like me. He said it quietly, and didn't falter, but the recognition of the truth hurt him, almost physically. He started the organization with 2 other people. One of them was dead before we got there, one of them was dead after. James pressed himself into Anesh's side, not looking at his partner. We're not new. We're not special. It's all patterns. We don't have to be new to be good, Anesh said. We don't have to be new to be better than them. Also, you're doing that storyteller thing you do, where you're mapping narrative onto reality. He looked down at the city, taking his eyes off James. Sometime back in history, don't give me that look, I only memorize numbers that do things, I don't keep track of years. Sometime in history, a man named Hardy went to visit his friend, Srinivasa Ramanujan. He took a taxi, and because this happened before smartphones existed, he spent most of his ride reading everything in the interior of that cab. When he got to his friend, he remarked that he had decided that the taxi's number was the most boring number ever invented. He'd had to read it on every surface, and it offended him greatly. I cannot imagine being the kind of person who is mad at a number, James said. That's because you're not a bored mathematician in the 1900s. Shut up, I'm going somewhere with this. Anesh slapped down his joke. Anyway, Ramanujan asks what the number was. Hardy tells him it was 1729. Oh, he says, that's not a boring number at all. Anesh looked over at James. It's the smallest number that can be expressed as the sum of two cubed whole numbers in two separate ways. 1 and 12, 9 and 10. The next number like that is a lot bigger. What's the point of the math story? James asked. Not in a mean way, but he was legitimately curious where Anesh was taking this. The point is, there are always coincidences. No matter how big the world is, sometimes your easily annoyed friend rides a taxi with a number that you know off the top of your head is a piece of weird math trivia because you spend your life thinking about weird numbers. The thing about reality, and yes, I know how stupid this must sound, but the dungeons are part of our reality. The thing about reality is, things don't have to make sense, James. Things are weird, things are messy. There might be patterns, but that doesn't make us trapped by fate. It makes us part of the cosmic coincidence. I just worry we're going to be stuck in this cycle until someone like us comes along and breaks what we built, James admitted softly. That we're trapped as the protagonists until we die or lose. Below them the city lights sparkled. A car passed by, and Anesh said, Someone was always going to try. That's not a coincidence. That's because you want to change things. That doesn't mean we have to lose. I can see the future, James said, in a voice that sounded like he was admitting to something, despite how silly the words were. Not in a magic way, just like someone who feels the way things are going. In the distance, a truck added its roar to the yipping calls of coyotes in the trees. We're going to bring in more people. We're going to uncover more power and more magic. We're going to build something really awesome. A city, a community, something the modern world would call a nation and be wrong about. Something beautiful and new, even if only to try something different. And at some point, someone is going to get afraid of us. Maybe in a small way at first. They won't just try to have us murdered, but we're going to upset things, and people are going to fight back, so they can keep their wealth, or their control, or their positions in society. And when they don't stop us, people are going to try again with more guns and less empathy. And then... Anesh, I can't see any farther than that. I can't see to where we win, where we build great works and solve great problems. I can't see past the problems to the world where we have swappable bodies and spaceships and teleporters for everyone. But I worry, and I worry for the world, and I worry for you, and I worry for myself, because I don't want to die, and I don't want our story to end. Anesh didn't know what to say. Part of him wanted to say that James couldn't know any of that was true, but it was the future he saw, too. Part of him wanted to say it would all be okay, but he couldn't know that. So instead, he did what James did. He cleared his throat, and he made a joke. Well, Sarah's the real protagonist, and we all know it, so even if we die, it should be fine. Yeah, what's up with that? James asked, breaking into a grin. He laughed, and as his laugh trailed off, he turned to surprise Anesh with a kiss on the cheek. Thanks, he said. I know I get like this a lot, but thanks. No problem. Now let's go back and sleep. I look forward to more prophetically dire dreams, Anesh said. Not because of fate, but because that would be a funny coincidence. Also because it feels weird out here tonight. He leveled a finger at James as he pushed off the guardrail and headed back toward the car. Yeah, okay, I'll accept that once, James conceded. Also, that's just how this city feels, I think. It's weird, he added as he followed. Hey, my man. Harvey stood by Reed's clutter fortress that most people would call a desk. He looked less tired than Reed remembered, a lot sturdier too, but then Reed hadn't really interacted with the leader of the response program much, aside from going through mandatory training classes to fully join up. You got a second? Yeah. Yeah, how's it going? Reed set down the folded stack of status quo reports he was working his way through. You're looking good. Been busy, Harvey answered. I'd love to chat, but I got a thing to get to. Can you move the mech? What? Reed blinked. Harvey tapped one foot, showing a little impatience, but keeping his voice steady. We're supposed to be using the fourth basement for a training exercise, but James and Momo left their warbot sitting in the middle of the floor. The fucking 1,000 unlabeled magic things all over the place, he said, with increasing annoyance. I'm just wondering if you can move the mech. I cannot, Reed stated. I don't really know how. Our hypnotist is staying with family for a few days, and James hasn't manufactured any more LSD. Harvey folded his arms and stared at Reed, and suddenly it looked like all the exhaustion he'd been covering up, all at once, came back. An exasperated frown cut a thin line through his salt and pepper goatee. Man, I am mad that I understood all of that, he said. Also, what the hell are we supposed to do now? Doesn't Response have a basement? Reed asked. Use that basement. Our basement is for dispatch, equipment, a rec space for on-call responders, and a telepad platform, Harvey stated. It's not for training. We should rent you a building for that, Reed suggested. Harvey shook his head. Bad idea. We're already getting noticed by police and civilians, and a lot of people don't like what we're doing. There's pushback. It's a little light now, but it'll get worse. Mark my words. Best not to have a building that isn't cloaked. Mark my words, Reed mouthed silently, shaking his head. Well, all right, how is Response going aside from that? He asked. I really don't have time to chat, Harvey said, checking his phone as it buzzed again. We'll just work around the mech, unless that's a problem? He asked, glancing up at the younger man who was slumped over the desk in front of him. Yeah, it should be fine, Reed waved his concerns away. The thing's mostly just asphalt, really. It's not alive or explosive. Neither of those were things that... whatever. Harvey let it drop. You have a good one, he said, turning to head back to the elevator. You too, Reed idly muttered, mind already wandering to the dozen other projects he was supposed to be working on or vetting. And from there, his thoughts wandered to what he could do to help out Response, or more accurately, to help Harvey with his public image problem. The main problem with Response, Reed decided, was that to anyone who didn't fully know what they were, they probably looked pretty scary. An outside observer was going to see an untrained militia with the power to teleport into secure spaces, essentially appointing themselves an unelected, unaccountable position of authority. And that wasn't entirely inaccurate, to be fair. Though they certainly weren't untrained, and Response teams were unarmed more often than not, which probably took them out of the dangerous militia category. But the teleporting was a concern. A lot of magic was a concern in a world that had no defense against it. The real public image problem, Reed decided, was that people didn't have an easy way to know that Response was legitimately there to help, or to have a fallback of reporting actual problems with Response members. Reed was halfway through sketching a design for a website for them, when he realized this may be something he should seek approval for. Learning from past mistakes, both his own, researches as a whole, and Nick in particular, Reed dialed it back a bit, outlined a plan, and made a note to talk to Karen and Harvey when they had more time. Then he had a brilliant idea, completely forgot to stop being reckless, and made a note for the next office delve to duplicate as many of the laser pointers that broadcast emotion as possible. Before that idea had even settled, Reed was writing up a proposal for creating some kind of public face infomorph to automatically propagate accurate information. By the time he realized that would almost certainly end badly, he was a half-hour late to check up on Nikhail. Reed sheepishly closed his laptop, a score of half-baked ideas folding up in a technological blanket. He'd come back to this later, maybe when Harvey had some free time. For now, he needed to go make sure Nikhail hadn't turned into some kind of human wasp hybrid or started irradiating his surroundings, or some other bizarre fate. Though as far as anyone could tell, Nick was fine. He also wasn't alone. There absolutely was a non-physical life living with him, within him, in some way. According to Planner, who Reed had scheduled some time ago to get a second opinion, it wasn't the same as an office infomorph. Nor was it the same as whatever Pathfinder happened to be. A different texture, a different function. It was very likely this was a larval form of the authorities that status quo had used. But how Nick could communicate with it, what it could do, or even what it wanted, if anything, was still unclear. At this point, all Reed could really do was offer support and update research's spotty taxonomic map of weird things. It wasn't much. Sometimes it felt like most of what Reed did running this basement operation wasn't much. And yet, over time, they'd accomplished a lot, and he was happy with it. Scars or no, they'd gotten some cool results. If only any part of the dungeon magics would help him focus on something for more than 5 minutes, maybe he'd have remembered to move the mech. "What's it like?" Elizabeth timidly asked as their group took a water and rest break. Elizabeth, along with Morgan and Color of Dawn, had been grouped up with Chavoy, the older engineer theoretically supposed to keep the kids from getting into too much trouble as they spent what was turning into several long days combing over the parks and hiking trails around Alice Springs. It seemed, to the two teenagers, like a bald-faced attempt to get them to do the safe part of the search that was also, unfortunately, a lot of exercise. Chavoy seemed entirely unconcerned with the number of miles they had to move. But then, she'd had about a month of prior notice and access to the Order's surplus supply of exercise potions. Also, she was using her Skulljack to pilot at least a dozen drones around and playing Tetris Attack on her phone at the same time, so she was probably less focused on how much her legs ached. In contrast to the human teenagers, Color of Dawn, who was teenager adjacent for a Camerconda, didn't seem to overheat or get tired. Or if it did, it didn't say anything about it, possibly just so as to not make Morgan feel more exhausted. Color of Dawn was still uncertain about the nature of their friendship, and so a lot of its actions simply played things safe. The problem was, while it was a beautiful place, the mountainous regions around Alice Springs were mostly covered in scrub-brush and rocks. Pretty rocks, but while they had reasonable confidence there was a dungeon in the area, specifically the area in the hills east of the city, there were a lot of hills east of the city, and walking through them was kind of boring. So while Chavoy perched like some kind of conquering explorer on the edge of a rock outcrop, comparing the terrain to a physical folded paper map, the three kids sat on rocks or coiled away from the more hostile-looking plants, and sipped water and made idle conversation. "What's what like?" Morgan asked, holding a half-full water bottle in a tired grip, and considering if it would be worth the effort to pour it all over himself. "No, not you. Color. What's it like, in a dungeon?" Elizabeth had wisely traded in the long skirt she usually wore for cargo shorts and a t-shirt for this trip, but the unhealthily thin girl still maintained the aura of the kid in school who sat by themselves at lunch and maintained proper manners even when no one was looking. Momo was apparently trying to dissuade her out of those habits, but even through the shoes full of dust and the sheen of sweat, her quiet politeness came through, even when her curiosity pushed her to ask questions. "Color of Dawn," the Camerconda replied. "No first name," it told her. I'm sorry." Liz started to apologize over-enthusiastically. "I didn't mean to—" "No concern," the Camerconda cut her off. "I have not been outside long enough to know," it answered her original question. "But you lived in there for years, right?" she replied, confused. "Aren't there big differences?" "Existed for longer. Perhaps 2 or 3 years alive," Color of Dawn said, trying not to react to the flinch Morgan gave sitting next to it. "You know the larger changes already," it said. Morgan picked up the thread of explanation. "There's a sky and sunlight and more space," he pointed out. "Have you actually been into the office?" he asked Elizabeth, now curious himself. "No, I've just heard Momo talk about it," she admitted. "I've only been in a couple of times," Morgan shrugged. "I don't really know if I want to go back, but there are some things that are, I guess, interesting." Color of Dawn looked up from where it was scratching patterns in the gritty dirt around itself with the set of mechanical arms it was getting used to wearing. "Also do not wish to return," it added. "But yes, interesting." Wasn't it your home?" Liz asked. No. Cage, Color of Dawn answered bluntly. Trap. Better out here. Has food. And light. Trap sounds about right. Morgan couldn't help but sound angry, though from his body language it wasn't directed at the Camerconda. If Color of Dawn was at all put off by mean comments about its point of origin, it didn't let that show. Free now. The Camerconda gave an approximation of a shrug, which didn't work very well with how the artificial arms were jointed. It decided not to repeat the gesture in the future. Better out here. Mostly. Sorry to pry. Elizabeth backed off from the conversation. No concern, Color of Dawn reiterated. Others have other thoughts. See where I was made as resource, threat, many things. It does endlessly spawn computer parts and bricks of precious metals, Morgan conceded. That's kinda cool. I guess that's why we're out here, huh? More of that would be pretty worth it, especially if it doesn't try to... His voice seized up as he caught up with his own train of thought. Eat people, he muttered, looking away from the others. Liz didn't ask about that one. Her etiquette senses were perfectly capable of knowing when to back off when it came to human interactions. Fortunately for all of them, they were saved from the awkward moment by their field trip guardian dropping into their little conversation circle. All right, kiddos, Chavoy announced herself with a kind of tired enthusiasm that tended to show up a lot with newer members of the Order. Turned out, giving someone magic and biotech and adventure would keep them excited and pushing their limits, even when a human probably should have been getting more sleep. We've got one more little climb, then we're looping back to the car. Topography matches the map, and all the maps line up, and no one spotted anything weird, so we're done with this place for the day. The group groaned, half in relief, half in anticipation of more hiking. Even Color of Dawn seemed a little put out, commenting that it would like some sort of Camerconda special fit combination shoe and pants if it was expected to continue slithering through dirt and rock like this. It's a climb down, though, right? Elizabeth asked, worried her legs wouldn't survive. We're not going up to the top of that, are we? Chavoy and Morgan both shot her the same kind of confused look. We're at the top of the mountain, Morgan said, in that voice that teenagers mastered early that clearly added the phrase, "You moron," at the end. What? No, there's a whole... That one! Liz turned and pointed east, farther away from the city, to where the flat hill they were on rose up further to an imperious, double-peaked spire of earth so tall it was capped with snow. I mean, I know it's probably Momo or Sarah who will go all the way up, since there's no official park trails there, Elizabeth continued. But isn't that the direction we're going today? The other three were all staring at the mountain. What the fuck? Morgan muttered. What in the fuck? Chavoy yelled. Where the fuck did that come from? The woman jabbed an accusatory finger at the landscape. How the fucking shit did we get ambushed by geography? Color of Dawn pivoted to look at Liz, and then, calmly, added, I, too, am ready to return. Hang on, Chavoy was still muttering. I'm just gonna... She pulled out her map and unfolded it, looking down at the paper, before the tension and anger went out of her shoulders, and she said, Yeah, no more trails today. Are you all ready to head back? What? Liz looked between the two of them, eyes afraid. What are... Morgan? Her voice trembled. What's going on? Morgan glanced back at her, and his own concerned expression vanished. We're heading back so we don't get attacked by bugs anymore? No, the mountain! Liz practically screamed. What mountain? Morgan and Chavoy said in unison. Liz pointed, now screaming in earnest. That one! Their guide followed Elizabeth's finger. What the fuck? Chavoy yelled, incredulous. Where the fucking shit did that come from? It's been there the whole time, Liz burst out, on the verge of tears. Take a picture of it. Don't look away. You keep forgetting. Her hands scrambled for her own phone, and with shaking fingers she took a series of photos of the clear blue sky. The instant her phone was no longer pointed at the mountain, it slipped from view on her saved pictures, returning to visibility only when the camera itself was angled in the right direction. No, no, no. The girl was panicking now. What is wrong? Color of Dawn asked, calm digital voice cutting through her mental state. There's something making you all forget, Liz half sobbed to the camera conda. Ah! The serpent nodded once in a low bob. Anti-meme protocols, it announced to the group loudly. Shit, okay, Chavoy said, kneeling down next to them. Liz, what do you need from us? Liz struggled to breathe properly, but this was specifically something they'd practiced for. She tried to remember what she was supposed to say, not out of a mimetic effect, just trying to get past her own panic. There's a thing you forget when you're not looking at it. I think it's what we're looking for. I don't know how to do this. Time check. Chavoy ran through the steps for forming memories around a hole in information. She noted the time, set a timer for 5 minutes, but held off on starting it. Where's the thing? She asked. Liz pointed again, and Chavoy turned to face the nearby mountain slopes. Fuck, that's really unsettling. How did we get ambushed by geography? She muttered as she started the timer. For the next 5 minutes, while Liz steadied her breathing and calmed down, Chavoy stared at the mountain without looking away, doing her best to not even blink. When the timer went off, she turned back around. So, you guys ready to... Her phone buzzed. She checked it. A note about missing time. It was 5 minutes later than it was supposed to be. Something had made her lose time. Kid? She asked. Do you know it's the wrong time? Elizabeth stumbled over the words. Yeah, okay. Location noted. There's something wrong here, and we can map around it. You can see and remember? She asked. Liz nodded frantically. I can. Okay. Chavoy shook her head. Wow, this feels gross. Like I'm being gaslit by the planet. Cool, I hate it. What do we do now? Morgan asked cautiously, making an effort to not look in the wrong direction, lest the loop start all over again. We head back, we tell everyone else, and tomorrow we come back and check it out directly, Chavoy answered. Probably. I'm not in charge of that last part. Sorry, I got carried away there. It's easy to forget around here. Around Australia? Color of Dawn asked, its tone where it was almost impossible to tell if it was trying to be witty or not. Sure, Australia, Chavoy smiled. All right, let's get out of here. 4 a.m. in a small Tennessee town found James unable to sleep. They'd gotten back to their motel safely, though they had to find a spot to park street side, even farther away in Taunton, since some jackass with a battered pickup truck had stolen theirs. It was hard to be mad, though, when that person was probably just as annoyed at having to walk 2 blocks to wherever they were going too. Anesh was snoring already, fast asleep, that cute little whistling noise he made when he rolled awkwardly onto his face during the night that James loved. But James couldn't find the right way to lay down, the right format for the blankets, or the right way to get his brain to shut up for a minute to actually fall asleep himself. He considered drinking some of the iced coffee they'd brought, but even though there really was no reason not to just teleport back to Oregon to grab more, in James's mind he was treating it like a limited supply for this trip, so he saved it for when he really needed it. Because his thoughts weren't him having an anxiety attack or an existential crisis. No, it was just that sleep didn't feel like the right call right now. Part of him was still trying to process the road dungeon. Elle still hadn't shared her name for it, for cryptic reasons, and James was increasingly considering overruling her and giving it his own label. The place was just too sparse. Maybe? For a dungeon that large, it didn't seem fair that it got away with so few rewards, so sporadically scattered and so jealously guarded. Now, maybe James's idea of what was fair was a little skewed, especially when it came to the world's dungeon ecology, but it just didn't map well to his other experiences. The office had rewards literally strewn everywhere. Granted, a lot of them sucked, or rather, they were useless in interesting ways. But sometimes you hit upon a matter duplicator, or a power that cured cancer, or an endlessly refilling silver mine. This was part of where their understanding of dungeons came from, that these things didn't have to specifically be used to be counted toward the amount of stable space a dungeon could manage. Though that was based off limited evidence so far, and the road really seemed like it wanted to contradict it. Was it simply that the rewards were that good? Or was it they were supposed to was a strange way to contextualize it, James knew, but he didn't know how to phrase it better in his head. Supposed to be actually fighting the creatures there to get the true rewards, like the yellow orbs the office gave. It was a lot of questions. It was also hard to focus on while being exhausted like he was, and it was also, really, a distraction. It was a pretty effective distraction. That line of thought, along with being frustrated with himself for not employing any of the half-dozen arcane methods of combat when faced with the security creature, kept his brain busy for a decent chunk of time. Oh yeah, James had noticed that he was an idiot. He had brought charges of manipulate asphalt into a dungeon made out of road, and that wasn't even the most obvious thing he'd forgotten to try. He just reacted, aimed, and pulled the trigger on his gun without even trying to trigger the attack buff on the status quo earring, or just using the earring in the first place to turn invisible and sneak in. James was too used to being a mortal human with mortal human solutions to problems, and he really needed to get over that. At a certain point in his musings, one of the motel doors behind him opened and shut. James shot a glance over his shoulder and watched as the young girl and her mom that were staying across the courtyard from him and Anesh walked out of their room. He shot them a friendly wave, but they ignored him, which was fine. It was 4 a.m. Most people didn't greet strangers at 4 a.m. He watched out of the corner of his eye as they walked down the sidewalk next to each other, probably heading to their own distant car. He was trying to distract himself from the fact that he was worried about sleeping again. The right person, at the right moment, had not only walked into James's dream, he had full-on hijacked it. Locked James in a dreamscape of its own creation, kicked in the door without asking, and set up shop for the night. James had an almost instinctive gut feeling that if the thing wanted to, it could do it again. Worse still, now that it was really paying attention to him, he was worried it would do it again. So he sat here, outside, and thought about magic instead. The summer sun was already starting to lighten the sky in the distance, and James realized he'd been sitting on the curb for a while. He was idly rolling a purple orb over in his fingers, trying to find the way to make the connection that would make an infomorph. But he wasn't really putting thought into it. It was more just fidgeting, distracting his hands, using part of his brain for that instead of for fretting. How do you make an anti-anti meme, anyway? A mimetic countermeasure? That was the big question. It would be something specific, and possibly easier. Because the thing that was affecting Elle wasn't actually damaging her memory. If anything, it was worse. She remembered perfectly, she just couldn't share it. It was so similar to something. James felt a hole in his own memory. It was similar to something important. Something he knew he wasn't supposed to remember, shouldn't remember. He sighed. The right person at the right moment was an absolute bastard, but at least he had given James a legitimate warning, and, in a way, a little bit of closure. Helped James do what he would have decided to do anyway if he had had all the information. Instead of dwelling, he thought of what infomorphs were, what the stuffed shirts in the office always made them into. Rules, more than anything else. Pathfinder was the odd one out, but she hadn't come from the office, had she? All the other ones were directives. Don't use weapons, stick to a schedule, follow a dress code, things of that nature. So James thought of how he would make a rule that would be the antithesis to the curse on Elle. And his brain caught on some of the first words he had ever learned in history class as a very young child. Under his breath, staring at the lightly glimmering purple orb in his fingers, he started to mutter, Congress shall make no law prohibiting or abridging the freedom of speech, of the press, or of the people to gather. The First Amendment of the Bill of Rights. James might disagree with a huge amount of the power structures of the world, but those centuries-old words resonated within him. And with the orb, too. He could feel it suddenly, a connection sitting there, nascent in its formation, but ready to spark to life. Ready to spark a life. And suddenly, James had an instinct. This was exactly like absorbing a blue or yellow orb, but this time he could push if he chose to, apply it outward, send it to another, The orb was primed for it. All it would take would be the mental command and a little nudge. He jumped a little, suddenly, as the girl and her mother rounded the corner ahead of him and walked silently side by side back to their motel room. The sudden appearance of people like that jolting him out of the proper frame of mind. He didn't bother waving this time, just giving a polite nod as they walked past, which still wasn't acknowledged. James sat the orb down and let his thoughts back away. He had it now. He could show Elle tomorrow. Hopefully, it would work out in the best possible way. He shook his head and leaned back against the sidewalk, staring up at the brightening sky. Why didn't his body want to sleep? It felt like he was on the edge, waiting for a fight that wasn't coming. It felt like... James snapped forward, eyes wide and worried. It felt very familiar. It felt like when he and Dave and Alana had led an escape out of the office. The odd feeling in the air, it felt odd because it didn't feel different. It felt like he was still in a dungeon.